My name is Emily Carter, and from the outside, my life looks perfect. The kind of life people scroll past on Instagram and whisper, she made it. I live in a glass-walled apartment overlooking downtown Seattle. The city lights shimmer like a reflection of everything I've rebuilt. I wear silk now, not because it's expensive, but because it doesn't cling to old bruises. This morning, I was rehearsing a speech for a women's conference, Healing Through Resilience. I smiled at my reflection, adjusted the mic, and pretended I wasn't shaking. Then my phone buzzed.
Mom.
It's been 5 years since I last saw her. 5 years since that night when my parents stood in our doorway and saw the mark on my cheek and said nothing. Not a word. Just the sound of my father clearing his throat and my mother's eyes flicking away. That silence was louder than the slap. Now, her name glowed on my screen, pulsing like a heartbeat I'd buried long ago. Emily, we need to talk, her voicemail said. Her voice sounded smaller, older. I set the phone down, staring at the city below. For years, I told myself I'd forgiven them, that success was my closure. But hearing her voice cracked something open. I took a slow breath, tracing the faint scar near my jaw. You wanted silence, I whispered, but I learned to speak through it. And maybe it was time they finally heard me. I was 24 when I married Ryan, a man who could charm a room before he even spoke. He had that clean-cut, all-American confidence that made people trust him instantly, my parents especially. They said I was lucky. I believed them. The first time he hit me, it wasn't a slap. It was a shove. I remember the sound more than the pain, my back hitting the kitchen counter, the glass of water shattering on the floor. He apologized, of course. Bought me flowers. Promised he was just stressed. I believed that, too. It became our pattern, his temper, my forgiveness, and my parents' blind approval. Ryan made good money. He had connections. He knew how to make me look like a woman well-kept. But behind closed doors, every compliment came with control, every promise with punishment. One Sunday, my parents dropped by unannounced. I'd been careful with concealer, but the bruise on my jaw was darker than I thought. Mom's eyes lingered for a second, just a second, before she looked away and asked about the new curtains. My father nodded along, pretending nothing was wrong. I felt something inside me fracture. After they left, I stood in front of the mirror, tracing the bruise with trembling fingers. I didn't cry. I just went numb. That was the night I remembered my grandmother's voice, soft, southern, strong. Never let pain be wasted, Emmy. If you have to bleed, make sure it means something. The next morning, I packed a bag. No dramatic goodbye, no note. Just one small act of rebellion. I took the broken glass pendant my grandmother had given me and slipped it into my pocket. It was cracked down the center like me. I walked out of that house barefoot, my breath shaky, my heart racing, the morning air cold on my skin. Each step away from him felt like a scream I'd been holding for years. When I reached the bus station, I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't go back. I remember sitting there, clutching that pendant, whispering to myself, this isn't the end. This is the beginning of who I'm supposed to be. And somehow I believed it. The first few months after leaving Ryan were brutal. I slept in a rented room above a bakery in Portland, where the air always smelled like sugar and survival. I worked double shifts, mornings at the bakery, nights cleaning offices downtown. My hands stayed raw from bleach and soap, but they were my hands again. They answered to no one. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I'd take out the broken glass pendant and run my thumb across its crack. It reminded me that damage could be beautiful, that what's broken can still catch the light. One morning, after a late cleaning shift, I saw a flyer for a community business workshop. Women Rebuilding Women. The words clung to me like hope. I walked in wearing secondhand jeans and nerves. That's where I met Nora Bennett, a retired marketing executive with sharp eyes and a laugh that could warm stone. She saw something in me, maybe the determination I tried to hide. You've got grit, Emily, she said after our first conversation. Grit can be polished into gold if you don't give up. Nora became my mentor. She taught me how to write a business plan, pitch ideas, and, most importantly, trust my instincts again. I started small. Handmade journals and motivational stationery sold at local fairs. Each design had a quote embossed on the cover, most of them words I'd whispered to myself to survive. Never let pain be wasted. Strength doesn't ask permission. Sales were slow at first, but one viral photo changed everything. A woman posted my journal on Instagram with a caption, "Bought this from a survivor." Her stories in every page. Orders flooded in overnight. I stayed up until sunrise, packaging notebooks with shaking hands and a full heart. I registered my brand, Scar and Soul, a name that felt like a heartbeat and a promise. Every product I created carried a message of resilience. Every purchase helped fund shelters for women rebuilding their lives. Within 2 years, Scar and Soul became a nationally recognized brand. I gave motivational talks under soft lighting and cameras, speaking to rooms full of women who saw themselves in my story, though I never named names. I didn't tell them about Ryan, or my parents, or the bruise that started it all. Online, I shared only glimpses, photos of my designs, charity updates, a few smiles. The world saw a successful entrepreneur, not the girl who once sat on a bus station bench with nothing but a cracked pendant and a promise. Some nights, though, when I'd lock up the studio and the world went quiet, I'd still feel that old ache. Not from fear, from memory. The kind that lingers like a shadow even in the brightest light. But every time it came, I'd touch the pendant and remind myself, scars don't disappear, they evolve. And mine? Mine were becoming art. The voicemail from my mother lingered in my inbox for 3 days before I found the courage to call back. Her voice trembled when she answered. "Emily, your father's sick. We need help." Those words landed like stones in my chest. Not because of pity, but because of the irony. The same people who once turned away from my pain were now reaching for my strength. I agreed to meet them. Not out of obligation. Out of closure. When they arrived at my Seattle office, I watched from behind the glass wall as they hesitated in the lobby. My mother clutched her purse like a lifeline. My father leaned on his cane, thinner than I remembered. They didn't recognize the receptionist saying, "Miss Carter will see you now." My office was nothing extravagant, but every inch carried meaning. The sunlight glowed across framed photos of women from our outreach programs. The walls held sketches from the early Scar and Soul designs. In the corner, the pendant, repaired and framed in glass, hung above my desk. A reminder of where it began. My mother's eyes scanned the space, confusion mixing with disbelief. You work here?" she asked softly. I smiled, calm and deliberate. "I don't work here, Mom. I built this." They sat across from me, silent. I could feel their discomfort, their awe, the weight of everything they never knew. "I thought you were—" My father stopped mid-sentence, unable to finish the thought. "Broken? Dependent?" I said quietly. "But broken things can be rebuilt. Stronger." My mother's eyes glistened. "We didn't know, Emily. We didn't realize how bad it was. You saw the bruise." My voice was steady, not sharp. "You looked right at it." She flinched. My father stared at the floor. The silence stretched, that same, familiar silence that used to suffocate me. Only now I owned it. "I used to think your silence was weakness," I continued. "But now I understand. It was fear. And I stopped living in other people's fear a long time ago." I stood and walked to the window, the skyline reflecting against the glass like another version of myself. "Do you know what's funny?" I asked, turning back. The same scars that once made me hide now fund shelters for women escaping men like Ryan. Every bruise became a blueprint. Every tear, a signature. My father cleared his throat, his voice rough. "We're proud of you, Emily." For a moment, the little girl in me wanted to believe it, wanted to fall into that simple, comforting lie. But I'd built my life on truth, and I wasn't about to stop now. "Pride doesn't erase silence, Dad," I said softly. "But acknowledgement, that's a start." The tension broke like a fragile thread. My mother began to cry, quiet, shaking sobs that filled the room. I didn't move to comfort her. I simply let her feel what I had carried for years. When the storm of tears passed, she whispered, "Can we fix this?" I looked at her, really looked. The woman who once pretended not to see was now staring directly at what she'd ignored. "Maybe," I said, "but only if we start with honesty. And honesty means no more pretending." As they left, my mother paused at the door, glancing at the framed pendant. "Your grandmother would be proud," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "So am I." When the door closed, I exhaled, the city lights flickering across my reflection. For the first time, I didn't see pain looking back at me. I saw power. The next morning, I invited my parents back for coffee, not as an olive branch, but as a negotiation. I wasn't their daughter seeking approval anymore. I was the woman who had learned to build boundaries from the bones of her past. They arrived early. My mother brought an old photo album, and my father wore a suit that hung looser than it used to. He smiled cautiously, like he was afraid his expression might break. "I didn't call you here to talk about the past," I began, pouring coffee into delicate porcelain cups. "I called you to talk about what comes next." My father leaned forward. "We'll do whatever it takes." "Good," I said. "Because this isn't just about forgiveness. It's about responsibility." They listened as I laid out my conditions. Not cruel, but clear. "First," I said, meeting my mother's eyes, "you both need to acknowledge what happened. Not to me, but publicly. Donate to the shelter Scar and Soul supports. Speak about the importance of seeing what's in front of you and saying something." My mother nodded slowly, tears already threatening to fall. "Second," I continued, "I want you to stop pretending everything was fine. Our family photos, our smiles, they were lies. I need you to start being honest with each other. With yourselves." My father sighed, rubbing his temple. "We didn't know how to help you, Emily." "That's the point," I said softly. "You didn't try." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was cleansing. Truth has a way of clearing the air like rain after a storm. "Third," I said, "you'll help me expand the Scar and Soul Foundation. Not with money, with presence. Dad, you'll volunteer at one of the men's accountability workshops. Mom, you'll mentor young women trying to rebuild their confidence. You both owe the world that much." My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Emily, we want to make things right. Truly." I looked at her hand, the same hand that once held me, once waved goodbye while pretending not to see the bruise. I placed my own hand gently on top of hers. "Then do it," I said. "Not for me, for the women who still think silence is safety." They both nodded. And for the first time, I saw something real in their faces, shame, yes, but also resolve. When they left, I stood by the window again, sipping the last of my coffee as the morning sun spilled across my office. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's the quiet confidence of knowing you could burn it all down, but you choose to rebuild instead. That day, I realized forgiveness wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about letting me go free. I'd spent years learning to survive their silence. Now, I was teaching them how to speak. Months passed. True to their word, my parents showed up. Not perfectly, awkwardly, hesitantly, but they showed up. My mother began volunteering at our downtown women's center every Thursday. At first, she just folded clothes and organized donations, keeping to herself. But one afternoon, I watched from the hallway as she sat beside a trembling young woman with a black eye and whispered, "You don't have to stay." Her voice broke halfway through, and I realized she was finally saying what she should have said to me years ago. My father spent weekends helping at the men's accountability workshops. He didn't talk much, but he listened. When one of the men said, "It's not my fault she made me angry," I saw Dad flinch, then look straight at him and reply, "It's always your choice." That was the first time I felt something close to pride for him again. As for me, I kept building. Scar and Soul expanded nationwide. We launched art therapy programs, shelters, even scholarships for survivors starting new careers. Every press interview asked about my motivation, and I always said the same thing. Pain is powerful when you give it purpose. One evening, after a fundraising gala, I came home to my quiet apartment. The city glowed below, a sea of moving lights and second chances. I poured a glass of wine, took off my heels, and stood before the framed pendant on my wall. The crack still ran through its center, but now it shimmered under the light. I touched the glass gently and whispered, "You were right, Grandma. I didn't waste it." In that moment, I understood something profound. Forgiveness isn't about erasing pain, it's about transforming it. The scars never fade completely, but they stop defining you. They start guiding you. My parents and I would never be the same, and that was okay. Some relationships heal like broken glass. The pieces fit, but they'll always catch the light differently. As I turned off the lights and looked out over Seattle, I smiled. Not the polished, camera-ready smile, but the one that comes from peace earned the hard way. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. About turning every bruise, every silence, every scar into something that could no longer be used against me. I raised my glass slightly toward my reflection and whispered my final truth. He left me with scars. I turned them into armor. And for the first time, I believed it completely.